Why your IRA may need an LLC. Hey, it's Adam Bergman, tax attorney and founder of IRA Financial. And on today's episode, I want to talk to you about why your IRA may need an LLC. So when it comes to using your IRA to make alternative asset investments, you generally have two options. You can do a regular self-directed IRA, which essentially means that you roll your IRA or 401k funds tax-free to an IRA custodian like IRA Financial Trust. So you'll basically take your IRA money and you will just transfer it tax-free to a custodian. And that is a tax-free rollover or transfer. And then you will then let IRA Financial Trust know what you want to invest in, i.e. real estate or cryptos or hard money loans. And then we will facilitate that investment for you. In that case, there's no need for an LLC since the IRA will be the sole owner of the investment. Now you have a second option, which is pretty cool. And in this option, you have the ability to set up an LLC or a limited liability company that will be the vehicle where you invest in. So it's really the same process, right? You roll your IRA or your 401k funds tax-free to IRA Financial Trust. And then IRA Financial Trust will fund a newly established LLC. And we'll get to where you should set up that LLC, in what state. But we'll fund it, and then you'll be the manager of the LLC, giving you what's called a checkbook control, okay, which basically means you get to write the check or execute the wire from your bank. You also get limited liability protection, which is super important, which is one of the most important factors of why people set up an LLC that's owned by their IRA. And you're going to reduce time to get investments done. So again, the two options are you can do a regular old self-directed IRA, move the money from your IRA or 401k to IRA Financial Trust, then facilitate the investment in the name of your IRA. Or two, you can set up an LLC. That will be a special purpose vehicle, generally newly established, that will be perfect for doing alternative asset investments. So let's talk about this. When would you want to do a LLC? What are the reasons? And number two, what are the investments that make sense to do? So the reasons are the limited liability protection and speed and the ability to have some privacy, right? Because the investment will be made in the name of the LLC, ABC LLC, versus the name of your IRA. Also, what's important is not only are you going to get your limited liability protection, but you're going to have privacy and speed. So speed is important because if you want to buy real estate, right? Let's say you have your IRA up here and it's going to own the LLC, and now you want to buy real estate. If you do it through the IRA without the LLC, you're going to have to go to the custodian, IRA Financial Trust, every time you need to make a payment or get something done with the investment. If you have the LLC, you as the manager have the checkbook control. So you will have the ability to get things done. So you can write the check, you can do the wire, you can pay the contractor, and you can effectuate your transactions through this LLC. So that's probably the most important and most popular reason why you'd want to do the LLC. So let's go through the transactions that are the most popular for the IRA LLC. I'd say real estate, number one. Number two, I'd say hard money loans where there's lots of payments going back and forth where you want to have more control. And then three, if you're using cryptocurrency and you want to use a different exchange other than Gemini, like a Kraken or something like that, the LLC makes a lot of sense. What are the investments where you really don't need the LLC? I would say like one-off investments. If you're just making an investment into a private business, a private equity fund, hedge fund, where you send the money and you kind of sit back and wait till you get your returns, the LLC doesn't make that much sense. Although some people tend to do it. Why? Anonymity and privacy. They don't want people to know they're using their IRA to make the investments. So what states should you set your LLC up? Well, the most popular way to do it is set up the LLC in the state where you're going to be doing your investments. Why? Because most states will deem you or your LLC to be engaged in a business if it owns real estate, for example, in that state. So if you live in Texas and you're going to be buying real estate in your IRA in Texas, you're probably going to want to set up a Texas LLC. Now, you may say, Adam, I don't understand. I have an IRA up here, okay? It's going to own an LLC. Why does it matter what my residency is? My IRA owns it. IRAs don't have residency. What does it matter that I live in Texas or Florida? And the answer is it doesn't really matter. So if it doesn't matter, then you might as well use a state where you have an address in, because you can save the cost of a registered agent. Now, there's some exceptions, i.e. California. California is the most aggressive state when it comes to protecting their ability to tax you. Why? Because they have a franchise fee, meaning they have the ability to tax you on the income. So there's a minimum franchise fee of $800 anytime you engage with a business in the state of California. So you may say, well, I live in California, but I'm going to set up a Delaware LLC to do real estate in California. Will that help? No. California is still going to attack you and say your Delaware LLC needs to file to do business in the state of California as a foreign LLC. What happens if your Delaware LLC is going to be doing activities in Wyoming or New Hampshire or Michigan? Does it still need to pay the franchise fee? California will say yes if you're a resident of California. So they're super aggressive. So just to summarize all this, if you're setting up the LLC and you're doing real estate, I suggest setting the LLC up in the state where you're going to be owning the real estate. All states recognize LLCs and their limited liability protection. If it's non-real estate and you don't live in California, you have some flexibility. So if you're investing in a hedge fund or a private business, you live in Michigan, you could potentially set up your LLC in Delaware and then file to do business potentially in a state if you have to. But if you're just making a one-off investment into a hedge fund, you're not going to necessarily be engaged in a trade or business in that state. So you can generally form the LLC in any state. But anyone that says just form the LLC in a specific state for any transaction, I don't believe is giving you proper advice, because especially when it comes to real estate, most states like New York, California will deem your real estate or rental income to be engaged in a trade or business if the property is generating some income. That means as follows, that you're going to need to form your LLC or at least file to do business as a foreign LLC in that state. If you don't, you may not be able to sue. You may owe back fees for the LLC state filing fees, and you may lose potentially your limited liability protection in that state. So there's some risks by not filing to do business in the state where you're going to operate. So this is why it's important to use an expert company like IRA Financial to set up your self-directed IRA LLC. You don't have to use the LLC, but if you want to use a company that can help you navigate these rules. Make sure you're setting up the LLC in the right state, reducing your costs, and also reducing potential pitfalls and also potential exposure on a state level.